Halo. Fadilah Nurul. Sini aja.
Assalamualaikum.
Waalaikumsalam.
Dengar
Halo,
suara
Pak.
saya?
Ya, Pak.
Apa kabar?
Baik, alhamdulillah. Pak Takiudin dulu ya, kayaknya.
Iya, nampaknya saya dahulu.
Oke. Moderatornya kayak belum ada. Oke.
Moderator di sini, Ibu.
Sampun. Oh, sudah. Nggak kelihatan. Oke.
So, Puan akan bertindak sebagai chairperson, moderator. Kamu sebagai moderator sesi.
Iya ya, yes.
Bu Ani ya?
Bukan, Pak.
Bu siapa? Bu Yuseptia atau Bu Ayudira?
Saya Dira.
Oke, baik. Ntar lagi. 10 menit ya, Mbak Dira? Atau 15 menit ya presentasinya? 15 ya?
Presentasinya
Ya,
15 sampai 20
kayak 15 ya?
maksimum ya.
Oke, sip.
Orang-orang Jogja, apa kabar?
Baik, Pak. Saya tetangganya Jogja, saya di Semarang.
Oh, di Semarang.
Iya.
Ya.
Yang lain mungkin di Jogja?
Ya.
Ya, Bu Septia, Bu Dira, mungkin di Jogja semuanya.
Iya, saya di Jogja baik-baik saja. Ini mohon maaf, saya sedang mencari meja yang
pas.
Iya, sinyal tadi. Something happened.
Okay, it's okay. Take your time. Moderator di rumah apa di PSSAT ya? Penasaran.
Saya moderator tapi sedang tidak berada di Jogja. Saya sedang di Bali,
Okay.
Bu.
Baik. It's okay. Pak Takiudin dari universitas mana?
UKM, National
UKM,
University.
Kebangsaan Malaysia.
Ya, Universiti Kebangsaan Malaysia.
Oke, good.
Sudah sampai di sini?
Oh ya?
Sudah sampai?
Sudah sampai?
Ya, kamu
What is
sudah
in
sampai?
English? Oh, no, not yet. I haven't visited. Not yet. Yeah, maybe someday. Hopefully. Yeah.
Jadi kamu bertugas di UGM ataupun sebagai peserta?
No, I'm currently a lecturer in Diponegoro University, Semarang.
Diponegoro University, right?
Yes,
right.
Political science.
Political science, all right.
Yeah. Wait. Oh, not this one. This. Oh, Rahmat Chandra, the flip game. I think it's related to my presentation.
Slide presentasi saya sudah kirim hari itu, jadi sudah ada pada moderator ya, slide presentasi.
Ada di host Pak berarti.
Sudah ada ya?
Dari host. Oke.
Sebentar, ini hostnya.
Ya.
Can someone help me to answer that, host?
Or otherwise, you can just maybe share screen. Yeah.
For your own computer.
Yeah.
I'm not very sure how.
Okay. You can just choose the button with the green, the green color with the arrow. Yes.
All right then.
So there is participants, chat, and then share screen. Then you can just click that button. You can try now if you want to to make sure. Yeah. Yeah. Before we starting. Have you found that one? Okay. Yeah, good.
Really? Okay.
Yeah. I can see your screen.
All right. Everybody can see it. Yeah?
Yes, but not yet the PPT. Maybe later.
So yeah, it's already 4 p.m. in Western Indonesian time. Shall we begin this parallel session?
Yes.
Okay then. Okay, selamat sore, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and I also believe that it's already night time in New Zealand. So good night to Professor David Roby in Auckland. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Welcome to the C1 parallel session of Symposium on Social Science in 21st Century, a critical perspective in social science. My name is Ayudhira Pradati, or for short, you can just call me Dira. I am now currently working in the Department of Communication Studies, Universitas Gadjah Mada. And today, I will be serving as your moderator in this parallel session. But before we start it, I wanted to take a few minutes of your time to carefully follow the rule of this session that has been provided by the committee. For the first rule, each presenter will be having time, 15 to maximum 20 minutes to present their papers. And then the second one is we will be having question and answer after all the presenter is done presenting. The Q&A is for 30 minutes, intended to all presenters. For all the panelists who have a question for the presenter, please write down the question on the Q&A tab on your screen. And later, I will read it later on the Q&A session. It's clear, yeah?
Yeah, it's clear.
And then, okay, for now, yeah, okay, sure. Now, without further ado, we will begin our first session in this afternoon. So for the first presenter, you will be hearing a presentation from Mr. Muhammad Taqiyuddin Ismail from the University Kebangsaan Malaysia, and he will discuss about the case study of the Coalition for Clean and Fair Election, or Bersih, in Malaysia. For Mr. Muhammad Taqiyuddin, the time is yours.
Thank you very much, Ms. Ayudira, and good afternoon, everybody. My name is Muhammad Takiuddin from National University of Malaysia, UKM. Today, I want to bring your attention to the most influential social movement in Malaysia, that is Coalition for Clean and Fair Elections, or we call in Malaysia as Bersih, or some rather call it the Yellow Shirt Movement, the Yellow Shirt Movement, right? So next slide. Can somebody switch to my next slide?
Okay, okay. Just wait for a minute.
Yeah. Okay, thank you, Ayudira. Okay, academics have credited the indispensable role played by Bersih in various aspects of political studies, including its vital role leading to the historic 14th general election, GE14 in 2018. As you might know, in 2018 general election, the dominant party in Malaysia, Barisan Nasional, was defeated for the first time in 60 years by the Pakatan Harapan coalition, right? So in other words, in the last 10 years, there are many positive studies written about the role of Bersih towards the democratization process in Malaysia. And today I'm gonna focusing on one important aspect of Bersih, that is its role as a election monitoring, its role as an election monitor in Malaysia. Departing from the typical narrative of Bersih, I contend that Bersih establishment, as well as its activities and orientation, emerged from and a reflection of a specific position within the Malaysian civil society that constituted the oppositional force toward the then Barisan Nasional. And Bersih overt political complexion seemingly made the organization more of an electoral guard dog within the power elite. This is in contrast with the role of election monitoring, which is supposed to be a watchdog that represents all parties and accepted by a community at large. Okay, so that is the gist of my argument in my presentation today. Okay, the next slide. So first, let's take a look at the conceptualization of protector dog in election monitoring. Since I don't want to repeat common discussion on the role of election monitoring, I try to highlight something new to the discussion. So I chose to adapt the concept of protector dog from media and anti-corruption studies. Right. First is the ideal one, which is the watchdog. Watchdog is deemed to represent the interests of all communities. And watchdog is regarded as more popular choice because its intelligence, social ability, and small size make it easier to manage. I argue that it is very difficult for election monitoring organization to achieve the status of watchdog, which is independent and non-partisan, although it is not impossible to attain, right? On the other hand, we have guard dog, right? So guard dog is a protector of a particular group who have sufficient power and influence to create and control their own security systems. Right? Guard dog is considered more aggressive with its relentless pursuit and threat, and has the potential to turn into an attack dog. So if you want to act as an election monitor, you cannot act as a guard dog, as this is against the basic principle of global network of domestic election monitors. And the final one is a lapdog. I think we know what lapdog is. Lapdog is a submissive to authority and subservient to the powers that be. In election monitoring, we call this group as a fake or zombie observers, right? And as you might know, sometimes this kind of zombie or fake observers often employed by the authoritarian regime to legitimize the conduct of an election. Right. Next slide. Before we talk about Bersih, let me explain to you the political context of Malaysia. Three important contexts that we need to understand before we talk about Bersih. First, in Malaysia, we have a polarized civil society that is due mainly to the ethnic division in Malaysia. Right. On one side, we have Malay Muslim NGOs that generally unreceptive to issue of democracy and have close tie with the UMNO that lead the Barisan Nasional, right? The previous dominant party. And on the other hand, we have the pro-democracy civil society, or some scholars rather call it oppositional civil society, right? They are urbanistic in nature, mostly represented by middle class and comprising mostly Chinese or Indians. Bersih falls into the second category. Bersih is an umbrella organization that represents 92 pro-democracy civil society in Malaysia. The second one, we need to understand the dual character of Malaysian electoral system, right? The election system in Malaysia is widely described as free but unfair. Free but unfair, right? The previous Barisan Nasional used varieties of manipulation to perpetuate its power, but right? But scholars have also agreed that the system still regarded as competitive, transparent, and efficient. The opposition still can win the election and capture several states. And of course, this fact is further affirmed in 2018 election when the opposition, which is a Pakatan Harapan, managed to topple the Barisan Nasional, right? And the third one, in Malaysia, we don't have a true election monitor in a sense, since most of them are proxies to political parties and partisan interests, right? As I said earlier, BN and UMNO often employs the zombie and fake observers. And on the other hand, we have oppositional link observers, such as Election Watch, MAFREL, and IEI. So since the 2013 general election, Bersih took over the role of the so-called oppositional watchdog. Next. Right. Bersih and the political complexion. What we need to know about Bersih? Bersih was initially founded through advocacy and mass mobilization in 2007. In other words, they did not start as election monitors, like their counterparts in NAMFREL or or maybe KIPP, KIPP in Indonesia. So until 2016, Bersih held 5 mass rallies to pressure the government of Malaysia for electoral reform. So from the start, Bersih act as a support base for opposition coalition, and the rallies often mobilize, or some prefer to call it hijacked by politicians, right? So this is some say the mistake of Bersih, because they cannot distance themselves from the politician. So, and many of the Bersih leaders also campaigning for the opposition parties in the general election since 2015 general election, right? So we can see from the start that the political complexion of Bersih is already against the principle of non-partisan election monitoring, right? Other than that, Bersih is unable to attract rural support. When I said rural support, generally it is translated as a rural Malay ethnic, which represent the largest ethnic in Malaysia, right? This is because due to Bersih image as an urban and middle class movement, and this has led to the growing perception that the organizations only cater to the urban Chinese supporters, especially after the Bersih 4 rallies held in 2015. And the last one, Bersih further invited criticism even from the opposite pro-democracy activists, when its former chairman, the influential Maria Chin, stepped down in 2018 and contest in the election under the oppositional tickets. Next. One of the important principles in election monitoring is the emphasis on constructive engagement and not confrontation. But this is not the case of Bersih, which relies heavily on confrontational approach since the early days of its establishment. The first and foremost is its hostility towards the Election Commission of Malaysia, right? The latter always been portrayed as incompetent, conspiring with the BN government, and lack of professionalism. Preemptive attack, misleading statements have become effective way for Bersih, the urban voters, to see the Election Commission in the bad light. In this context, Bersih arguably tried to imitate the lesson of grassroots democratization in the Philippines and Indonesia, right? Because some of their activists, including their chairman, always see some parallel in the lesson of Philippines and Indonesia in terms of election manipulation and the grassroots democratization. But I argue that such inspiration was taken without regard to the context at hand, since the level of suppression and election manipulation carried out by the Suharto and Marcos regime was more blatant than in Malaysia. Next. An important issue of election monitoring is the prerequisite to produce accurate and impartial reports, report of election monitoring. And such report must be based on fact rather than perception or rumors. I mean, if you happen to read election monitoring reports from international bodies, some professional bodies such as IFES or Commonwealth Secretariat, which happen to be the reputable international election monitors, you can see that writing monitoring report is akin to write an academic paper. I mean, we have to be very careful when we put our claim, when we put our claim and our judgment, right? And although Bersih should be credited for publishing its observation reports on the 2013 and 2018 general elections, it could be argued that both reports were generally based on a fault finder's mentality, right? If you happen to read both Bersih report, and you can Google in the Bersih website for the 2013 and 2018 general election, you can see that some what I argue as some improper way to present their finding. This include the use of overzealous tone, the value-laden statement, exaggerated claims, and ignore the misconduct by the opposition parties and only emphasize the ruling party, the arbitrary conclusion, and visibly partisan recommendation, right? And compared to Bersih value-laden reports, more balanced assessment were produced by 3 professional election monitors in the 2013, such as IDEAS, Center for Public Policy Studies, and Merdeka Center, right? These were some of the election monitors also appointed by the Election Commission in the GE 2013. But if you happen to read their reports, while this CSO criticized the shortcomings of the Election Commission and the manipulation orchestrated by the Barisan National Government, they also acknowledged the smoothness of the election, the competency of the Election Commission, and the compliance with procedures on the polling day. I just want to highlight one quote or comment from a friend of Bersih in Philippines, right? And even for this study, I also interviewed some of the election monitors organization from Indonesia as well, and they all very agree with the consensus is the partisan image of Bersih is a concern to them, and this is one of the reasons why Bersih until now is not joining the UNFREL, the Southeast Asia region for the election monitoring, right? And this is a quote from one of the seasoned observer in Philippines, right? He argued that Bersih is their friend, but the thing is they are not fair in making assessment, right? So this is the problem with Bersih, because if you the judgmental biases that often seen when they produce their election monitoring reports. Next. Right. We have discussed how fierce Bersih was before the GE 2018. We can say that this suits their position as a guard dog to the Barisan National regime. But after the Pakatan won the 2018 election, Bersih started to change their color. According to one dog expert, this is just a metaphor. The guard dog is not necessarily tough and can be tamed into a lap dog that is less imposing and even friendly. So I couldn't agree more with this metaphor to depict the role of Bersih after the transition of power in 2011. Even before GE 2011, one columnist, Terence Fernandez, he argued that what if the opposition does take power in Putrajaya one day? Will that be the end of Bersih too, or should it continue as a noisy check and balance? So when Pakatan became federal government in 2018, Bersih leadership and activists were incorporated into the power structure, especially as EC commissioners, right? And they started looking at things with a different perspective. And sometimes they even downplaying some of the allegation of the election fraud. And most of the time, they use the very same excuse by its predecessor with regard to the election offences. This is where many feels that Bersih proximity to the power structure has affected its ferocity. And in the several by-elections held after that, Bersih reluctant to criticize Pakatan openly regarding the election misconduct. The timing of Bersih is also a reflection of the dilemma surrounding pro-democracy CSOs in the post-GE14 era. Civil society in Malaysia, the pro-democracy civil society, which had been accustomed to the strategy of resistance and tended to side with the opposition, now seems to feel content. With the inclusion of many activists in the system, there is concern that they are losing their edge in becoming a third sector of the society and appear to submit to the Pakatan government on certain issues. So the last slide. So in conclusion, rather than following the corpus of studies that view Bersih as a civil society savior in Malaysia, I argue that the Bersih reputation as an election monitors is rather questionable. Over the years, their reciprocal relation with the opposition parties have compromised its objectivity, and it has become less effective both as an independent CSO and importantly as a non-partisan election monitoring body. And after gaining larger access into the power structure within the Pakatan government, Bersih appears to be compromising with issues its own pursuit and seems to losing their edge. However, with several caveats, we are not. It is not the intention of this article to suggest that the presence of Bersih is unimportant, and we are not trying to question their competency and skill as election observers. In all fairness to Bersih, the movement possesses valuable assets for the operation of election monitoring, including resource experts, ability to secure public funding, capability to attract a relatively large number of volunteers, and publishing report accessible to the public. Nevertheless, we argue that the organization should make every effort to eradicate the guard dog image that is partisan, urban, and middle class, as well as its emphasis on the mass protest. So, Aruyati, that's all for my presentation today.
Okay, thank you for Mr. Muhammad Takiuddin. That was exactly 20 minutes. And thank you also for sharing with us such an interesting case study regarding to clean and fair election in Malaysia. I highlighted the importance for Bersih is the importance of role of stakeholders in many elements in Malaysia who can be the guardian of election through Bersih program and so on. And then now let's moving forward to second presenter. I personally welcome to Mrs. Rahma Chandrika and Mrs. Astrid Adelia Natasha. Both are coming from your Faculty of Law, Universitas Gadjah Mada, who will be speaking to us about the Asian transboundary haze and palm oil investment in Indonesia. To the presenter, time is yours, and please introduce yourself first.
Hello everyone, my name is Rahma Chandrika. I am the co-author of the Blame Game Irony about the palm oil investment in Indonesia and ASEAN transboundaries. And also my co-author, Astrid Adelia Natasha. We are both from the Faculty of Law of Universitas Gadjah Mada. Can the host share our presentation? Can it be full screen?
Okay, sorry. Can everyone hear me?
Hello?
Rahma, am I audible?
Yes, Astrid?
Okay. Yes.
Okay, you
Okay.
can start.
Okay. Greetings, panelists and participants. I hope everyone is well and safe. Allow us to introduce ourselves. My name is Astrid Adelia, and I'm here with my friend Rahma Chandrika. We are from Faculty of Law, Universitas Gadjah Mada, and we will present our study entitled The Blame Game Irony, the ASEAN Transboundary Haze, and the palm oil investment in Indonesia.
Sorry, sorry for the host, can you present our presentation? Because there was technical problem from my laptop that I couldn't share my presentation. Okay, it's okay if it's not in full screen. Okay, next slide, please.
Right, okay. We will present our presentation in these 8 parts. Next.
Next slide, please.
Right. Transboundary haze pollution has been a recurrent issue in ASEAN over the years. Due to the damages it causes, ASEAN states have recognized haze pollution as emergency as early as 1985, marked by the establishment of ASEAN Agreement on the Conservation of Nature and Natural Resources. And currently, transboundary haze is regulated in the ASEAN Agreement on Transboundary Haze Pollution established in 2002. The major root cause of haze pollution is mass fires due to the slash and burn method. The perpetrator illegally lit fire to shift the land function to clear the forest and open up new spaces for palm oil plantations. This unsustainable method is so commonly used that neighboring ASEAN states like Singapore, Malaysia, and even Thailand suffer from severe transboundary haze pollution centered from Indonesia. Even the government of Singapore and Malaysia have also stated their complaints. However, ironically, neighboring governments also proactively engage in bilateral negotiations on behalf of the investors. As Indonesia is the biggest producer of palm oil in the world, there is a high global demand for palm oil. This industry is deemed as attractive for foreign investors, like from Malaysian investors and Singaporean investors. And for example, as of 2009, Malaysian palm oil plantation firms hold more than 2/3 of Indonesian palm oil plantation area. Next slide, please. In 2010, the oil plantation area in the islands of Sumatra and Kalimantan has increased 600% since 1990 to 7.8 million hectares. And in 2011, Indonesia provides 85% of the world's palm oil. Next slide, please.
So in regards to the literature review, we are highly inspired by the paper and numerous papers, articles, and also research by Dr. Helena Farki, political geography and environmental specialist in South Asia. So Dr. Farki's research has always been candid about Malaysian investors and also Indonesia's palm oil sector and the ASEAN transboundary haze. So numerous reports have been accumulated from website and article journals that talk about the history and recent development of transboundary haze and the culprits behind them. So therefore, the authors are aiming to fill the literature gap between the foreign investment of Indonesia's palm oil sector that contributes to the ASEAN transboundary haze, the legal implication of ASEAN Transboundary Haze Agreement of 2002, and the fact that foreign investors should also be made liable for its aggressive investments. Next slide, please.
Next slide, please. Okay, with that being said, we are here to answer first, if Indonesia is solely liable. Second, next slide, please. How exactly is the enforcement of the ASEAN Agreement on Transboundary Haze Pollution established in 2002? Next slide, please.
So now we're talking about the attraction of palm oil investment in Asia and why foreign investors are very attracted to invest in Indonesia palm oil plantations, and why Indonesia is becoming the world's palm oil the world's palm oil exporter. Next slide, please. Indonesia has its strong ambition to increase its production and exportation of palm oil to 40 million tons annually by 2020. In 2014, it is revealed that Indonesia alone produced 32.5 million tons of palm oil, with 80% being exported to the global community. In 2019, it is reported that Indonesia officially sealed off plantations by 4 subsidiaries of Malaysian groups due to fires in their concessions. These Malaysian groups are namely Simadarbi Plantation, IOI Corporation, TDM BHD, and Kuala Lumpur Kepong Group. There were also fires linked to Singaporean groups such as Bumitama and Musemas. From these reports, it is proven that palm oil is a source of foreign exchange for Indonesia. Furthermore, Dr. Farki also states that Malaysian and Singaporean firms are among the largest investors in Indonesia's palm oil plantation sector. Next slide, please. The palm oil is proven to be an essential driver for economic growth in Indonesia, since it contributes up to 2.46% to the country's gross domestic product as of 2017. The ever-increasing foreign investment in Indonesia's palm oil sector is because Indonesia has specific capacities that other ASEAN countries lack of. It is because Indonesia is known to have a vast, highly diversified natural resources, as well as competitive and productive labor. And the fact with all of these advantages, Malaysian and Singaporean investors see Indonesia as to fill in the void of their land restriction and labor scarcity issues. Next slide, please. The palm oil sector provides many employment opportunities, which reduces poverty, and it came across as an ideal package for a developing country like Indonesia. Hence, it can be said that there is a two-way street interest between foreign countries and Indonesia in regards to the attraction of palm oil investment. And why Indonesia is felt the pressure to increase their palm oil plantation every year is because they want economic growth. They need employment opportunities, and also factors such as patronage cultures in Indonesia and economic regionalization has become the major factors that attracted foreign investors to invest in palm oil sectors in Indonesia. Next slide, please.
One of the purposes of the ASEAN Agreement of Transboundary Haze Pollution is for the stakeholders of palm oil plantations to accommodate the interests of regional sustainable development, which aims to mitigate the transboundary haze pollution. The presence of non-intervention principle congests such mediation, ironically. This principle highly upholds the sovereignty of each member party and prevents the affected ASEAN member states of the haze to strongly compel Indonesia or the stakeholders to mitigate the transboundary haze pollution. And the danger of unsustainable palm oil production. Unsustainable production is dangerous because the slash and burn method is generally cheaper and faster, thus it's commonly used. But after the fire is ignited in the forest, the haze movement is so uncertain because it's dependent by the topographical conditions, the weather, and the fuel. This haze is so harmful because it immediately impacts public health, carbon footprint increase, and many other damages. Last but not least, public policy defects. Public policy defects worsens the situation. Ministry of Agriculture of Indonesia has imposed a regulation that requires palm oil plantation firms to obtain a sustainable certificate system since 2015. However, 83.66% registered firms in Indonesia have not yet obtained the certificate as of 2018. And these companies have not yet been subjected to any environmental liability or any other sanctions. Next slide, please.
So now we're talking about the investor corporate liability to show that Indonesia is not the only actor liable for the ASEAN transboundary haze. Next slide, please. Transboundary haze is an annual event that occurs during the dry season from July to October. There will be a thick smoke haze from Sumatra and Indonesia, Borneo to Singapore and Malaysia. The consequence from the ASEAN transboundary haze is in fact severe and everlasting, that it prompted Singapore to launch the Singapore Transboundary Haze Pollution Act, which is an act concerning conduct which causes or contributes to haze pollution in Singapore. And in regards to Malaysia, as it has been an annual event, in 2019, Malaysia announced that it would be prepared to send a diplomatic note to Indonesia to call for immediate action against the raging fires that triggered the transboundary haze. Next slide, please. However, we feel that it is ironic that the states that were affected the most were the ones who have been actively investing in Indonesia's palm oil sector. Indonesia is not the only ASEAN state that uses the unsustainable method of slash and burn. Malaysian and Singaporean firms are also used fire as a cheap way to start a new palm oil plantation. It is also evident that there are diplomatic rules over the ASEAN transboundary haze, as Malaysia decided not to introduce a law to hold companies accountable to curb the annual smoke haze that severely impacted Malaysia. Next slide, please. Since the early 2000s, Indonesia has always faced intense criticism from NGOs regarding its policy to develop palm oil plantations on forest land. However, based on multiple concrete reports, there is the involvement of Malaysian and Singaporean foreign investors, as well as the government in the palm oil sector, that contributes to the ASEAN transboundary haze. It is revealed that in the foreign direct investment perspective, the liability of the foreign investor for environmental harm cannot be excluded by contractual means, and there is an extent of the obligation of the home state to ensure that its multinational corporations to comply with environmental standards in the host states, especially when these standards are in accordance with international environmental law. It means that Malaysian and Singaporean government should have oversee this multinational corporations that constantly invest in the palm oil sector in Indonesia. Next slide, please. So the two major drivers of Malaysian and Singaporean entering into Indonesia's palm oil sector is economic regionalization and patronage politics. Economic regionalization is because Malaysian and Singaporean firms are in ASEAN has allowed states to increase their access to markets and economic growth. It's because they are part of ASEAN, they have close proximity, which leads to the patronage politics, where Malaysian and Singaporean firms have patronage linkages, and which created a leeway for them to have lenient environmental policies in order for this firm to open up new palm oil plantations in Indonesia. Next slide, please. Therefore, if you were able to point a finger on the accountability of transboundary haze, it is the collective actors behind them, such as the governments, the multinational companies, and their foreign investors. Next slide, please.
We're moving on to the effectiveness of the ASEAN Agreement on Transboundary Haze Pollution. Next slide, please. Okay, basically, Article 7 regulates to monitor fire-prone areas. However, despite this article and the Ministry of Agriculture instruction that prohibits peatlands use for palm oil plantation, the operation in this area is on the rise regardless. Because of its deserted conditions, peatlands areas are subject to this regulation because there is a lack of claims from land use rights and from native community rights, which leads to lenient monitoring system. And Article 12, Paragraph 1 regulates to promote regional cooperation and partnerships. The ASEAN Agreement regulates that member parties may request assistance from other member parties or when the other member party offers assistance. However, this offer requires the consent of the receiving party and may be challenging to be implemented. For example, Malaysia and Singapore had offered aid to Indonesia in the past, but Indonesia refused it, and it is presumably due to the sovereignty reasons. And Article 27 of the ASEAN Agreement regulates the settlement of disputes between parties shall be done through negotiation or consultation. However, in cases of forest fires, many of the perpetrators had been caught with strong evidence of criminal activity, but still be able to escape from getting heavier punishment. In short, ASEAN has a limited organizational capacity to combat the challenges posed truly. Next slide, please.
So in conclusion, transboundary haze in ASEAN is a crucial issue that does not only involve Indonesia as its main actor, but also the foreign investors as well as the government from other states. Pointing the finger solely on Indonesia as the culprit behind the ASEAN transboundary haze will not lessen the transboundary haze that have severely impacted Southeast Asian states. The agreement of the ASEAN transboundary haze in 2002 also regulates to monitor, assess, prevent, and respond to the transboundary haze pollution. So we feel like as the ASEAN agreement on transboundary haze pollution regulates the monitoring and the assessment, and it is an established agreement since 2002. There needs to be a collective work and despite the non-intervention principle for these Southeast Asian states to cooperate and mitigate the dangers of the ASEAN transboundary haze, because it is an annual event and and every year it's just getting worse. Yeah, that is all from us today. Thank you very much for coming and paying attention to our presentation. And thank you.
Okay, thank you to Ms. Rahma and Ms. Astrid for addressing such an interesting issues. As I can highlight from the presentation, the debate of Asian transboundary for the several issues of political geographic and haze pollution that caused mostly by palm oil plantation hasn't been properly addressed and still need a proper monitoring system among neighboring countries, even though there's a huge amount of interest in investing economic values in palm oil plantation to support development in Indonesia. So for the third presenting, there will be Mrs. Laila Al-Firdaus, and then Mr. Rauli Manalu, and Mr. Hendra Tri Ardianto, and Mr. Kushandajadi from Universitas Diponegoro, Semarang. The presentation is addressing knowledge and the politics in local natural resource governance and its relation between governments and the NGOs. The time is yours, and also please introduce yourself.
Sorry. The politics of environmental evaluation in local government, assessing the politics of bureaucracy in post-reformation in Indonesia. So there is a bit shift of topics, but the big topic is still the same with the last version I submitted to the committee. So by studying the environmental evaluation, I actually want to portray the politics of bureaucracy in the daily governing process. in the local environmental governance. Maybe it still can have relationship with the second presentation just a little bit. Okay, I use the context of Indonesia post-reformasi, in which most public are aware of that reformasi has resulted in the strengthening of democratization. But in fact, as some other scholars also has notified that in addition to the strengthening of democracy, post-reformasi also showed us the strengthening of oligarchy with the more dispersed oligarchy actors in the local regions. And this paper aims to explain environmental evaluation as the practice of the bureaucracy politics. Research methods of this paper is based on a compilation of case studies in 4 provinces in Indonesia, including Central Java, that has in which the regions are having mining as one of the main drivers in their local economy. East Kalimantan, same as Central Java, also relied on mining. Central Kalimantan in palm oil, and Bangka Belitung also in tin mining. So by discussing the how the environmental evaluation conducted in these 4 provinces, our papers aim to see more deeply what is the politics bureaucracy having manifestation in that context. Okay, bureaucracy and politics in environmental governance, literature review. So this paper is based on the existing literature review that is already well established on the study of the politics of bureaucracy. Just for a short discussion, that the politics of bureaucracy is defined as the interconnectedness between bureaucracy, the public or citizen, and the elected governments in the governing process. Nah, in relation to the Indonesian context in post-reformasi era, there are contexts of decentralization and also direct election that cannot be denied, in which decentralization and direct election not only promoting wider participation of the public, but also the rise of the patronage and the partisanship of the in the local government, that also further bring pressure to bureaucracy. What makes the issue getting more interesting is that in natural resources rich regions, the pressure that is present in the context of decentralization and direct election getting more heightened due to the multiple actors that is involved in the local governance, of course, to compete for resources accesses. As we might be already aware of that, for example, in Central Kalimantan or in East Kalimantan or in Sumatra, actors from Jakarta or even for foreign countries are so easy to find and also so easy to influence to the governing process or local decision making, including also the local strongmen or maybe local businessmen that own the business in the natural resources like palm oil or mining. Nah, in this situation, we thought that bureaucracy politicization become unavoidable because bureaucracy is an instrument that help everybody to pursue their goal, like in political economy, as shown or maybe exposed by the businessman or maybe politician. But what this paper trying to argue is not only the politicization of bureaucracy, but also another look of bureaucracy that also taking part in the political game of the decision making, especially in the natural resources rich regions. The idea of the bureaucracy as a political actor, as an active political actor, is not new actually. Maybe one of the scholars that also portrayed this quite well in Indonesian context is Berensot, 2018. However, what Berensot tried to do is to portray the politics of bureaucracy within the electoral context. Berensot tried to explain how bureaucracy can be so highly politicized by the political affiliation of the local government head, and that is why they become so fractured, or maybe fractured, or maybe divided. Our research not only trying to portray this, but also we try to go deeper to the daily governance process, and we argue that the political game played by bureaucracy also induced in the very daily policy making. In this case, is related to the natural resources and environmental evaluation is one of the field that can show us quite clearly how the politics of bureaucracy is played. Okay, and what is the research finding of our study? As we might already know that environmental issue is actually a great concern of public, and if we talk about environment, it is always contrasted with the natural resources business. That is why we usually claim that in area that is rich with natural resources, politics is usually very contentious, rich with conflict of interest. Our finding told us that one of the most significant token that show us how the politics of bureaucracy in environmental evaluation can be seen, for instance, is in the dysfunctionality of the Office of Environment. We cite at least two of our informant statement. First of all, that said that he actually from the Office of Environment in one of the province we investigate. If the local leaders come from palm oil company in decision-making process, they then become the man of the companies. And then the second one, the company drive the environmental consultant and assessment committee to approve their environmental permission proposal, which means that Office of Environment is just become an instrument to legalize or maybe legitimize the environmental permission and environmental evaluation result. Okay, and so how is the politics of bureaucracy environmental evaluation manifested? So we spot at least there are two mechanisms that is important to discuss how the politics of bureaucracy occur in environmental evaluations. The first one is in terms of environmental data, and the second one is in terms of environmental evaluation project implementation. In terms of environmental data, there are at least three manifestations of the politics of bureaucracy that is interesting to discuss. The first one is the data deletion, and the second one is the data changing, and the last one is not presenting the data publicly. Of course, because this is not an investigation research done like by the police or other court institutions. So this only compile the interview result of our field work. For instance, in data deletion, there is a statement from Informa that said that if the data found do not comply with the interest of the company, of course, there is suggestion that there is suggestion to delete the data because it can, it can influence the public impression about the quality of the environment that would be impacted by the mining or maybe plantation activity. For example, the level of the acid in the water in the river, if it looks as too disgusting to be presented publicly. So there is also a phenomenon in which the data is suggested to be deleted. The same is happened with the data changing or number changing in the evaluations, environmental evaluation. One of our informant, for instance, said that our province is known to have a big problem of annual haze, but we found that in our annual environmental equality index, the index looked to improve annually. So it means that environment there has no problem at all. So actually, they also question about this issue and feel that maybe the government prefer for business rather than for environment. And the last one is not presenting data publicly. So in some agencies, we investigate that there are some complaints actually from the community that the quality of water getting decreased and the water volume also decreased. They face drought. Sometimes in rainy season they face flood. But when we try to access the data, what is the quality of the water, the quality of the soil, then we cannot find anything in either in interview or in the website. So and even if the government supposed to do some or to make some RPJMD, like development planning, 5-year development planning, which in which the local government is obliged to provide kind of environmental assessment quality. Sometimes the government just simply does not have data, and they have to like cracking down any data from anywhere else, which is of course questionable for us. Is it valid or not? So this is the first common practice of the politics of the bureaucracy in the environmental evaluation. And the second one, in terms of subcontracted project implementation, we found that there are at least two manifestations of this. The first is the involvement of the academician as legitimation, and then the subcontracting of the project to the NGO. For the first one, among the environmental consultant, it is common to involve professor in big university in their organizational structure or in their study or in their study organization in their study. However, based on our interview, the informant often said that the name of professor is just put as because because they already have big name, but actually they sometimes it is not rare that they actually do nothing because the consultant company only need the name for the legitimation. So the study can be seen as if it is academically accepted. And then the second one, by subcontracting the environmental evaluation to the non-government institution, it is also happen to the bureaucracy when the study is looked as a bit risky, like for instance, to measure the level of acid of the water in a palm oil area. Okay. So what is the goal of the bureaucracy to do this? I think we can discuss it more in the Q&A question. So just for your information, this is still a draft of our paper. So question and input are welcome. Thank you.
So, okay, thank you for Mrs. Laila. What can I highlight it from the presentation is that the environmental issues is already having a big stake, actually, in a public opinion. But sometimes in some places, politician, bureaucracy, and the government's actors make it hidden for the purpose of political interests and the political game, of course. Thank you again for sharing with us, Mr. Laila and the team. And then we will move forward to for the fourth presenter first, and then we will having Q&A session after presentation from Professor David Robbie. As the fourth presenter, please welcome Professor David Robbie from the Auckland University of Technology, New Zealand, who will be sharing with us about how to countering a COVID disinfodemic through a campus initiative. So Professor David Robbie, the room and the time is yours.
Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou koutou. That's an Indigenous greeting from Aotearoa, New Zealand, my country. Just briefly, I'm the director of Pacific Journalism at Auckland University of Technology, and also director of the Pacific Media Centre, and also editor of Pacific Journalism Review. My paper that I'm presenting here for this session is essentially about a project as a result of the pandemic, and derived from environmental journalism that we've for a number of projects we've been doing for several years. So I've got a PowerPoint presentation, so I'll start with that if I may. Thanks. Are we seeing it?
Yeah.
Are we seeing it?
Yes.
Are you seeing my screen?
Yeah. Perfectly.
Good.
Yes.
Good. Excellent. Yes. Good. All good. Right. Let's get going. Right. You see that? All good. I mean, I can't see it, so I'm sort of relying. You can see the start of my presentation, right?
Yeah.
Good.
Sure.
Okay.
It's perfect.
All right. So, thanks so
Yes.
much. Yeah. So 2 weeks into New Zealand's COVID pandemic lockdown, UNESCO warned that false information campaigns about the pandemic were a grave danger to many people's lives around the world. This followed a warning in mid-February by the WHO Secretary General, who declared at a gathering of a foreign policy and security experts in Munich that we're not just fighting an epidemic, we're fighting an infodemic. He added that the fake news spreads faster spreads faster and more easily than this virus. Concerned about the risks for both health and public responses to disinformation, the UN Secretary General then identified the new enemy as a growing surge of disinformation. The UN launched a COVID-19 Communications for Solidarity initiative through digital first responders to rapidly inform people about facts and science and to promote and inspire acts of humanity globally. The term disinfodemic was adopted by the authors Bossetti and Bonchava in a policy brief for UNESCO to describe the falsehoods fueling the pandemic and its impact because of the huge viral load of potentially deadly disinformation. This had been described by Antonio Guterres as a poison and humanity's other enemy in this crisis. Hoax stories and conspiracy theories have proliferated online and have continued to do so. The disinfodemic has led people infected by the virus to try unproven treatments and false cures that were dangerous, according to UNESCO. An example of this risky disinformation came from President Trump. He had a number of examples of this, but anyway, he was lambasted by the medical fraternity after suggesting research into whether coronavirus might be treated by injecting disinfectant into the body. Disinfectants are hazardous substances, of course. He also appeared to propose irradiating patients' bodies with ultraviolet light, a notion rejected by a doctor actually at the media briefing with him. Now, UNESCO's Director for Freedom of Expression and Media Development, Guy Berger, told the UN's self-reporting news agency that there seems to be barely an area left untouched by disinformation in relation to the COVID-19 crisis, ranging from the origin of the coronavirus through to unproven prevention and cures, quote unquote, and encompassing responses by governments, companies, celebrities, and others. So this was very much the pattern. And then from a human rights perspective, this is one that influences the Pacific Media Centre and its project, such as the Coronavirus Plus Coverage Cluster, which I'll tell you a little bit more about in future in this presentation. This is the notion that it's everybody's right to seek, receive, and impart information. And this information is actually truthful and trustworthy. UNESCO and its partners work to protect, and strengthen this right and build knowledge societies in a range of ways, including countering the contamination of disinformation, supporting independent quality journalism, empowering global citizens with media and information literacy, and assisting member states in meeting international standards on freedom of expression. The UNESCO policy brief offers two typologies for understanding the disinfodemic. Firstly, it identifies 9 key themes and 4 main format types associated with disinformation about COVID-19 and its impacts. The themes range from false information about the origin, spread, infection and mortality rates, through to symptoms and treatments, and include content designed to defraud, along with political attacks on journalists and misrepresentation of credible independent journalism as fake news. The purpose of this paper is to provide analysis of the context, rationale, and pedagogy of a project of the Pacific Media Centre at Auckland University of Technology to cover the pandemic and its impact in New Zealand and Pacific microstates between the date when Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern declared a national lockdown on 19th of March this year, and when it was finally lifted after undergoing 4 levels of restrictions on June the 8th. While the microstates sought to keep the coronavirus out of their vulnerable countries, a cornerstone of the Ardern government policy was to prevent New Zealand, quote, inadvertently being the source of an outbreak in the Pacific. After going for 102 days without recording any case of COVID-19 community transmission, New Zealand is now locked again in a campaign to methodically stamp out the coronavirus in what has been branded as COVID lockdown 2.0. An impending general election has been postponed by 1 month from September the 19th to October the 17th because of a sudden outbreak involving a Pacifica index family of 4 people. The country anxiously awaits the outcome of this unexpected cluster, which is now 109, but relatively small by global conditions, of course, tiny really. So 109 people after a period of complacency had actually set in after this long period without COVID-19. As at August, well, actually today, this is the latest figures, as today, the country had a total of 1,339 confirmed cases of COVID-19. And there are a total of just 129 active cases in this country at the moment, including 19 imported cases that have been kept at the border. About 40,000 people have come into New Zealand in recent weeks. And so out of those, there are actually only 19 cases that are in managed isolation facilities, with 9 people in hospital. So while the leadership of Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern has been praised internationally for having one of the finest records in COVID-19, she has also enjoyed the most popularity of any New Zealand Prime Minister due to her qualities of effective communication, trustworthiness and empathy. And these qualities are likely to carry the Labour Party to outright victory in the election, given that polls give her a margin of something up to 30%. And the disarray of the opposition National Party, which has had 3 leaders in the last 3 months. Now, this slide that you're seeing at the moment is actually from last year in March. You might recall the terrible massacre of 2 mosques in Christchurch, which has shaken New Zealand, but at the same time galvanized unity right across the country. And just Prime Minister Ardern really stood out for her leadership and bringing people together at this time of mourning and tragedy. And right at this moment, this particular terrorist is actually in the courts in Christchurch this week. He's going to be sentenced this week, and he's facing more than 60 people who, survivors and families over a period of 4 days. So that's happening right now, this week. So just a couple of, one of the symbols of the COVID campaign under Prime Minister Ardern is this very simple message: be kind, stay home, save lives. And it's a very simple message, but it's been a very effective at bringing people very much together in the country. Now, while many of the international plaudits have been enthusiastic and generous about her handling of the COVID crisis, ranging from masterclass unquote, the New York Times, to squashing the curve in the Washington Post, and a decisive voice of reason, quote unquote, by US television presenter Whoopi Goldberg, several analysts and commentators have been less kind about New Zealand's news media, one describing their machinations as leaving much to be desired. This particular commentator, Glenn Johnson, a New Zealander, but was actually writing for Al Jazeera, said a case can be made that the nation's media, laundering many of the opposition's attack lines, which include disinformation, and big business talking points, have repeatedly endangered public health. Well, with multiple clusters across the country in April and so on, New Zealand has really followed this policy of trying to keep COVID-19 out of the country and finding it and stamping it out, a policy of elimination. And this has been done by controlling entry at the border, disease surveillance, physical distancing and hygiene measures, and testing for and tracing all potential cases and isolating them and their close contacts, and broader public health controls, depending on the alert level. And so very much truth. I think one of the things that's come across with the leadership of Prime Minister Ardern is this very credible, truthful leadership. And this is bringing me to the project that we've got. The Internews is a news and current affairs network of more than 750 active partners, including the Pacific Media Center, across 5 regions in more than 120 countries and for nearly 40 years in more than 100 languages. It launched a 5-year strategy in February this year, just a few weeks before the COVID pandemic began and profoundly altered the entire world. The strategic document was updated in April and has since become more relevant than ever. The Internews COVID-19 response is rooted in the knowledge that information can literally save lives. The agency argues that journalists, civil society leaders, and other communicators sorry, just lost my spot there, have been working hard to serve as essential intermediaries between governments, public health experts, and public to help stem the epidemic. Nevertheless, the agency deplores the fact that many governments are making this difficult, misleading the public, detaining and arresting those who seek to hold power to account, concealing information and using the crisis as a justification to suspend human rights, elections, and checks on their power. And this critique has been shared by a number of media freedom watchdogs, advocates, and journalists who have warned against a creeping authoritarianism. So very much the biggest story at the moment, as the internet, I've just taken this quote from their strategic report, the biggest, as they say, the biggest story in the world is devastating the news media itself, as collapsing economies are causing a collapse in the news business, just when it's needed the most, especially the truthful and dependable media. Now, the Internews approach, as adopted by us at the Pacific Media Center, is parallel with our own philosophy, which is based on the Pacific Talanoa journalism model. And this is a paper that I wrote about this and published in Media Asia last year, about the style of very truthful, dependable journalism in the region, the model that we use very much in the Pacific. So going back to the Internews approach, there are 5 core elements in this approach. Firstly, that people need clear evidence-based information that they can understand and act upon to stay safe. They need misinformation, that misinformation and disinformation are flooding all information environments. Authoritarians exploit fear to silence dissent and accountability. Activists face compounded security risks, and the media market itself is collapsing, just as I took that quote from earlier on. Now, as an enabler of postgraduate Pacific journalism, project journalism over several years in the Asia Pacific region, the Pacific Media Center developed a plan in 2016 for a 2-week climate change field trip for 2 postgraduate graduate journalists to gain firsthand experience of reporting on climate change issues. And they do this across the Pacific, but particularly in Fiji. Now, this Fiji was selected for the climate project for logistical and media resource reasons, given that the center already has a long-established relationship with that particular university, and because we're able to use accommodation at that university's campus in Fiji. Also, USP is currently engaged in a major Pacific-wide climate change baseline media research project, and there was a synergy between our 2 initiatives. Another partner at USP was the Pacific Center for Environmental and Sustainable Development, which was established as a center of excellence in 1999 for environmental education, research, and community engagement in the Pacific region. The director, Professor Elizabeth Holland, has led the center in carrying out environmental and climate change research to empower Pacific people with the adequate knowledge to be able to adapt to the impacts of climate change and to also pursue sustainable development. So that makes it a very strong partnership between these all 3 elements. This is our umbrella page here, Pacific Media Center, and that's an anchor page for the stories as they get published. But while the Pacific Media Center did not embark on a project with Internews initially, is that I've used Internews very much as an example, because it's actually been, we've been working towards a project with them, which we started in June. But this paper is primarily about the project that we did initially at the point of New Zealand going into lockdown. So we used the Internews guidelines very much for that 10-week project. And during that period, we published 265 articles. And one of the key people in that project was a graduate, postgraduate student who had just graduated last year with a postgraduate diploma in digital media at our university, but he had prior experience as a news agency journalist for the New Zealand Press Association, which closed down a few years ago, sadly after a century of operation. But we were able to have a good partnership with his experience in this project. Now, so it's the climate change project and COVID project, which has come on stream for this project. The paper itself, I won't go into this now, I don't think I have time for this, but the paper itself that we've done goes into very much the experience of the journalists. Sri Krishnamurthy was the key person that I just mentioned a moment ago, but we actually have a cooperative collective of students all around the Pacific. And also with, we have some we contributed from the University of Santo Tomas in the Philippines, and a number of others, some in Australia and so on, and some other Pacific countries. So it has been very much a collaborative project. So here's Sri Krishnamurthy. We also have a radio program, a weekly radio program called The Southern Cross, which is run on a radio station called 95 BFM. It's an independent alternative media, but very, very popular. And that's run out of our Auckland University, a different university from my university, but we're almost near neighbours. And we use their studios and their radio to run our program. We have a radio station ourselves, but it's only got a license to broadcast for about 1 kilometer. So we don't have much of an audience. So we team up with this neighboring university to do that. If I've got time, I think just going to show you just quickly a little video clip and see if it actually works here. Just show you a little bit of an example of where we have a partnership on this. She's one of our graduates for Star Qatar.
Is there any problem, Prof?
So just carrying on there, that just gives you a bit of a taste of the programs that we have and so on. This is actually our website that we run. That's actually a cover page for the page. And then we also, drilling down into the website, we have this project that's around the coronavirus. And so all the stories do aggregate into that space. And drilling down further, that's the further listing of all the stories that come up and so on. So we have a range of different things. We collaborate with the Ministry of Health and so on, with up to the minute data, what's happening in the Pacific and so on. This is very interesting here. Just there's a cluster, the cluster search that the family that we saw on the video that was mentioned, how basically to track down incredibly quickly and able to essentially to ring fence this outbreak, which Trump thought was huge. I mean, Trump made these ridiculous statements last week about this. But anyway, I mentioned about the creeping authoritarianism, some of the articles that we've written about the impact of laws and so on in the region, and that's been very popular to get information about this. Then also we've got, we provide a space for many independent voices around the Pacific. This particular person that you're seeing on the slide there is the Oro province governor, Gary Juffa. He's a bit of a cult figure, actually. He's the governor of Oro province in Papua New Guinea. And he's a member, that means he's a member of the opposition in parliament itself. But he's incredibly popular among young people, teenagers and people in their 20s and so on. He's one of the brightest members of parliament, and so people like that get quite an airing, if you like, on our websites and so on. So basically, that's what I had to say very quickly. I have got this reference here, but all the other references and in the paper itself, and I believe that eventually these are all going to be published, and so hopefully that will be very helpful and useful for you. Terry Makasi, thank you so much for sharing with me and listening to me. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor David Robbie. Addressing the interest topic, of course, about how campus can be an alternative or should have taken position as a trusted information source, especially in this challenging situation. And also student and academician also can be an important actors to be communicators, also as well as part of social responsibility, I believe. Is there any question for all the panelists? We will having 30 minutes to Q&A session from the all participant. If is any question. If it's not, I will ask for to if I allowed to ask to Professor David Robbie. I was just wondering, within the media campus as a media alternative, can we actually measure the effectiveness of the campaign through Media Campus Initiative? Is there any difference impact from the information that has been created by the campus and by the other parties such as governance and also news business, for example?
Well, that's a very good question. I am not sure that I can really sort of satisfactorily answer it. What we do a certain amount of research. We've got a fair amount of feedback that comes on the website and so on. We can only judge it on the audience we have. Now, interesting aspect about our website, the Asia Pacific Report, is something like a quarter of the audience is actually in Indonesia. That's and I can't really necessarily explain that at all, but that's around roughly about the same. Like the New Zealand audience is only about a quarter, and about a quarter in Indonesian is about I think it's roughly, we have quite a lot in the US, and that really surprises me. But anyway, coming back to your actual question about the effectiveness, we can only sort of assess that without an actual research project specifically dealing with this, we can only really sort of assess it, assess it on based around the sort of responses and the audience that we get. Because it's like it's a campus-based venture. We have no budget. We entirely rely on voluntary work. We've got the student I mentioned. We do have a sort of limited part-time role that's paid, which is sort of like a core role, but virtually all the rest of the contributions are voluntary. But because it's a space which has got a wide range of information that's vital, especially at a time like crises, we do get this very strong responses from the audience all around the region and so on. There's one mainstream media organization in New Zealand that specializes in the Pacific. Radio New Zealand has a Pacific section, but they have about 20 journalists. We only one part-time person, a couple of part-time actually people, and the part-time students. But what it is, it's a threshold point, because everybody who comes involved in the project, they go on to very influential jobs in the media. Like, for example, you saw that young woman who was presenting on that video report. She was doing the job that Shri is doing now about 4 years ago. And she's already one of the key journalists on a television program called Tangata Pacifica. And she's tremendous.
Okay. Because I think that the environmental and public health is also having the same situation right now in Indonesia, actually, or maybe in the developing countries. That's both of this issue of environmental and public health is something new, because a couple years back, we mostly talk about all the economic development thing. That's why maybe the environmental issues that has been addressed by Bu Laila and Miss Astrid and Rahma, Miss Rahma is also having quite a difficulty to reform the the perfect, not the perfect, but the proper narration about how the important are the issues. So I think it's our role to make it happen.
Yeah.
Make it, yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Well, I mean, just to add. a part of our philosophy is very much to provide, the reason why we started that Asia Pacific report, for example, was actually an outlet for our students. So it's not enough just to criticize the, say, mainstream media and say that, oh, this should be done or that should be done. From the safety of our university campuses and so on, we set out to try and show, well, this is an alternative, this is what we can do. And in the process, the students really gain a tremendous amount from it. And also when they go into mainstream, they influence the journalists in mainstream and suggest, well, these are ways that we can actually approach things a bit differently.
Sure, I agree with that. Any other comment or question for the panelists, for the participants? Okay.
Can I ask?
Yeah, sure. Okay.
Okay, thank you. The first question is for Rahma and Astrid. Yeah, I think the presentation is interesting, and I agree with the point they asserted that the law enforcement is not quite effective in punishing the perpetrators, especially the big company. I just wondering if you ever also studied the people diplomacy in the Haze issue. I mean that in some point, in some cases, we know that burning is, you know, in the community level is claimed as one of the local wisdom in the community in Kalimantan as one of the effective ways of farming. But then, I mean, if there is a case of the haze, those that become the escaping good, the escaping good is always the small farmers in the community. So do you have data or maybe information? What is, or maybe how is the people's diplomacy in the haze issue, and at what extent it works in influencing the ASEAN approach or ASEAN policy? Because I think if I follow your presentation, it mostly tell us about the diplomacy in the level of the government or state. And then it is the first question. And the second question is to Mr. Takyuddin Ismail. What is the voice of the people in the grassroots in Malaysia finding that NGO like Bersih is no longer effective in monitoring the election? So if I may compared to the Indonesia, yeah, there is already fragmentation in community between pro and con to those who rule the government. However, there is still belief or trust among the community to the civil society that try to advocate the interests of the community, and this implies that there is still trust, even though the very little portion. Yes. So I mean, what about the situation in Malaysia? Do people still have trust or belief in NGO in general, given the case of Bersih that is not quite trustable in the case of electoral monitoring? Thank you.
Right. Okay. Do I answer Ms. Lila's question immediately, or how does that work?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, Ms. Lila, for your question. It is an interesting question because during our research we found that there are a direct link between the way the government acts on behalf of the investors when they conduct a bilateral investment treaty, when they establish the BIP, excuse me, and they definitely as they act on behalf of the investors, if they're concerned about the transboundary haze pollution, they definitely should have they definitely should have may address that in the negotiation process. And yeah, maybe Rama can add a little bit more on that.
So probably the people's diplomacy in this regard is I think it is a representative of the mounting criticisms that have been thrown to the Indonesian government, because like the people are like the people who are growing the palm oil plantations in Indonesia, which are actually, like we've mentioned before, that palm oil plantations create employment opportunities, and I think those are the people that you meant, Ms. Laila, about people's diplomacy. And I think they receive huge criticisms from the ASEAN states. However, we are more focused on researching about how the foreign investors is are are also liable for the palm oil plantation. So for the palm oil investment, and which causes transboundary ASEAN transboundary haze. And I think the government in the Indonesian government also speaks for the people who are being mistreated because of this ASEAN transboundary haze. And we also feel that that is not justified, and that is why we brought up this topic in the first place. I think that is all for me. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
Answer to Mr. Takiuddin in a short sentence, I think. Sorry, your mic is still unmute.
Yeah, I'm sorry. All right. Okay. Responding to your question, I think the cardinal rule to be election monitors is that you have to gain trust from the large segment of society, right? The problem is in Malaysia is that we are a really divided society par excellence. So this also affect the effectiveness of the election monitoring and the neutrality of the NGOs. If you read one article by Sharon Lin, she argued that in a polarized society, there's a less chance for the election monitoring to be effective, right? I mean, in Indonesia is a different case because bukan a different and a strange case, because as we can see in a last pemilu, the election monitoring is mainly conducted by the Bawaslu. And we can see in the Pemilu 2019, Bawaslu is always at loggerheads with KPU, right? And Bawaslu is seen as trying to overshadow the role of civil society in election monitoring. So, as far as I can see in Malaysia, we don't want to create another Bawaslu in Malaysia. We still want the civil society to handle the election monitoring. But sometimes this is a problem in Malaysia because we are really divided society, and that also goes to the NGO. We have binary sort of NGOs, the pro-democracy versus generally is the other one is a Malay Muslim NGOs, which is not so receptive to the issue of democracy. So that's my short response to your question.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for the answer, Mrs. Rahma, Mrs. Atrit, and Mrs. Muhammad Takiuddin. Is there any questions? We're still having 10 minutes. Okay, if there's no question, maybe I will just summing up this forum. First of all, I thank you very much for all the presenters and the participants that has been addressing very interesting issues today through several cases and through critical perspective on social sciences and how perspective on social sciences can integrate it, then expose and construct knowledge facts, problem, and challenge assumption about policies, about institutions, about the new practice that most of the time is obscure power relation that foster inequality, and how social science in the future can critically engage with the broader issues such as public health, environmental political, and so on. So the next request, this is requested by the committee for the reporting. So please turn on the video. We will take a picture or screenshot from the session. If you're willing to turn on the video, we will take a screenshot and I will send it to the committee so we can post it in the Instagram. We will be having this forum. Okay, in my count, I will count 1, 2, 3. Okay, then 1, 2, and 3. Okay, I already have the pictures. So finally, on behalf of the committee of the second symposium of social science 2020, I would like to close this session and thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you and have a good day and stay safe and healthy.
Thank you, Ayudhira.
Thank you, moderator, for
Right.
superb job.